Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and with me today is my co-host, Janelle Blue. And we're going to talk about planning a research trip. It's something that the more you plan ahead of time, the better or the more likely it's going to be that you're going to have a successful trip. And I tell people, even if you're going to the public library, in this area you're going down to the National Archives, the DAR Library, the Library of Congress, or if you're going halfway across the country, or if you're going to do what Janelle did and go to Europe, you need to plan, because the more you plan, the more successful your trip is going to be. And I'm certainly guilty of getting downtown and realizing, oh, I left this home, and now what did that say? So.
Right, and I have, in my early days of genealogy, I would just want to go to a place and just kind of do let's see what we can find. And of course, to really maximize things, you need to know what your question is, yes. What are you there to accomplish, and what have you planned in advance to get you where you want to be.
Yeah, that advanced planning is the most important thing to be successful. And what I basically tell people to get started is whatever you are using to track your research, if you're using a genealogy program, if you're using the old paper forms, if you're doing, I do a combination of genealogy program and Word documents that I've created, but make sure you have everything up to date. Make sure that if you have been on a prior research trip, you've filled in all the blanks and filed everything away so you don't go on that research trip, find something really neat and get home and find, oh, well, the last time I was there, I also found that neat document.
Oh, yeah.
So that you've got everything together.
And doing some sort of a family group sheet or a tree, taking that with you. And there are many sites that are applications that you can subscribe to that will give you those family trees, whether it's Roots Magic or Family Tree Maker, just to name a few. There are many others that are quite good. But that gives you an awful lot of information that you can use as a tool.
Yeah, and I always tell people, go with specific questions. Write up a list, have a priority of what you want to accomplish while you're there, so that you're not floundering and thinking, okay, well, what else can I do? Have that list specifically. The other thing I tell people is make sure you've looked into the research facility. Do they have what you're looking for? When I first started going to the National Archives, they were up on the 4th floor of the building. And there you could sit in or go into some of the staff members' offices. And I met and got to know one of the staff members there. And so whenever I would see that she was on the desk answering the phones and answering questions, if she wasn't busy, I would pop in. And I don't know how many times she didn't have somebody come into the office or call on the phone and they wanted their genealogy, or they wanted their great-grandparents' marriage certificate or their birth certificate, or they didn't know. They assumed it's the National Archives. The National Archives has everything, and they didn't. And of course, the phone conversations were usually more interesting because the staff member would be more animated in the faces that she would make. So knowing what is there, one of the things that I do a lot of my research in New Jersey. When I'm looking for a divorce record, I have to know the time period, and I have to know which facility it's in, because it can be in any one of 2 archives or the local courthouse where the divorce took place. And the time period also tells me what format it's going to be in, whether I can look at it on microfilm, whether I have to order the original record. So those are important preparation things that you need to know, so that you don't go off and don't have success because you went to the wrong place.
Well, so I wanted to find land records of my Houston ancestors, and for the longest time I would go to the state archives in Austin and use their microfilm. Well, I could have just gone to the Houston courthouse right there, because they not only had everything, it was all online, and they would print it out for me right there on the spot. And I got, I don't know how many records in one day that it would have taken me forever to go through those microfilms. So there could be a better way.
Well, and you bring up an important point, microfilm. There are so many things that have been microfilmed. Unfortunately, the Family History Library is no longer doing their microfilm loaning program to the local family history centers because they're scanning and going to be putting things up. But I've always told people, if you can borrow the records, whether it be the films that they used to loan from Salt Lake, whether it's something you go to your public library and borrow interlibrary loan, it's better, and most of the time a lot cheaper, to borrow that stuff and use it locally and save the research trip for the things you can't get access to, like the original records that aren't on microfilm or on a website or something. So I always tell people, see what you can get from home. That saves. It's nice to take a trip, but it's nice to save that money if you possibly can, and don't have to make the trip to get everything.
Well, when I went to Poland, we had everything that I had, all the background information. We had identified everything that I had. We did the family group sheet. So all of that was done in advance, and that was available then. When we went to Poland, we knew exactly where we wanted to go. We knew what records we were looking for. And that was really important, because when you take a trip like that, it's expensive. And besides that, the archives aren't open that often. And so you got to make the most of your time that you have.
That's an important point that you make, is knowing what the timing is. What days are they open? What time are they open? Because some facilities, like courthouses, tend to be open earlier in the morning, close earlier in the afternoon. Generally aren't open weekends or evenings. So you want to do that planning and know exactly where you want to go and when and what time to be there.
And that planning really needs to be in writing.
Yeah.
Too, because then when you go there and you do the research, you're going to also want to document what you looked at and what you found.
Yes, that's another important point, that whenever you find things, you want to make sure that you've documented, whether you put it into your program or your sheets if you're doing it on paper when you're there, but at least try and do it that night when you're back at the hotel room or wherever you're staying, so that the next day you've got the updated information. That's why computers are great for doing that.
Yes.
Then you've got the updated information, and you've filled in the blanks. And oftentimes something that you find in your research gives you a clue to something else that you may not have known you wanted to look for.
Well, and also the absence of information. If you look at a particular document or book and it's not there, and it should be there, you want to document that, first of all, so you don't go back and look there again. Okay. But secondly, that may give you a clue about something. Yes. It may tell you they're not in that place at that time.
Yeah, I tell people, if you've looked in the index once and you don't find them, they're not going to show up the second or third or fourth time you go back and look at that book. So keeping track of what you have actually looked at is another important part of the process. And the other things, planning ahead, knowing where you're going to stay, how you're going to travel. Are you going to take a car? And of course today with GPS systems, it's a lot easier than when we used to have to use maps, although I still trust them a little more than the GPS. Yeah, I've had some experiences where, you're on a bridge and it tells you to do a U-turn into oncoming traffic. You want me to do this? So knowing, where you're going to be able to stay, particularly if it's a small town. There may not be a whole lot of choices for places to stay, places to eat, things like that. So you need to explore those kinds of things before you go also, not just the facility that you're going to research at, and making sure that you do take the things that you need. Don't put your medication in your checked-in bag. And also don't ever put your research in your checked-in bag at the airlines, because it can get lost.
Oh, yes.
And you can get there, and I've never had my bags lost, but I know a couple of people that have been on business trips and their bag gets lost, and it's 3 or 4 days before they finally find it.
That's
and
true.
If your research is there, you're dead in the water. Another thing that you definitely don't ever want to do, and I found or know somebody that accidentally did this, is take records that look like original records with you. If you feel you need an original record, make a copy of it where it's obvious it's been put on a photocopier and copied. Where this person happened to order some vital records, and they came, they opened the envelope, saw what
In the
they
mail.
were. Yes, came in the mail, stuck them in their bag, and went on a trip for work. Came home, forgot they were in the bag, was downtown for a meeting, and at that time the National Archives was open evenings, so they figured, okay, after the meeting I'll grab dinner and go to the archives. Well, they did. That worked out well till they went to leave, and the archive staff inspected their bag.
Oops.
And there's these documents. So it just created the problem of a staff member had to come down and verify that they weren't trying to walk out of the archives with documents. So
Now they have a new system,
they do have a new system. So it's less likely that you would run into that. But they still inspect the bags. And if it is something that, even if you didn't go into the research room with it, you're walking out the door.
Well, I
So-
think it holds true for any facility. It doesn't just have to be National Archives.
no,
I mean, you don't want
any
anybody
place
thinking that you're walking out with their documents.
So and some of the facilities too, an archives or library, we often visit those, and as I've said, you want to be prepared for them. One of the places that I find quite helpful in planning things like that, particularly if I don't know about the facility, is a website called Cindy's List, CYNDI''S. Do an internet search, Cindy's List will come up, and as you probably know, it is just
Jam-packed
with stuff. I told people yesterday in a program that I did, it's the kind of thing I get started looking for something, and it takes you down the little nooks and crannies and pathways and all, and a couple of hours later you look and you think, gee, what was it I started out looking for? And so I tell people, make sure that you bookmark things. Go back to them as quickly as you can, because sometimes things do disappear, but it is just a phenomenal place for finding information. I've only ever had one topic that I didn't find anything, and I was looking for colonial research in the mid-Atlantic states. New England, lots of articles on how to do colonial research, but nothing in the mid-Atlantic states. So that was the only topic. Usually I find far more. But this will give you, Cindy's List will give you links to research facilities, their hours, things like that, their websites, how to contact them, those kinds of things.
Well, also, checking their catalogs, their online catalogs, because if you, for instance, on the Family Search, that wonderful website and service where you can go into their catalog and you see everything that they've got. You can see whether or not it's online or whether it's in microfilm or where you're going to have to go to get it. But at least you know what they've got. There's no
yes.
point in making that trip if you don't
Yes.
if they don't even have what you're looking
Yes,
for.
and that's so important because, you know, I've been in facilities, as you probably have, where people come in wanting things. We don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where is it? We don't know. You know,
Right,
it
right.
may be a case like that. You know, courthouses is another place that we often have to go and research, although a lot of things have been microfilmed, but not everything that's in the courthouse. And this is one of the places that I always tell people you want to make sure you're aware of the hours, because they do often open early and they close earlier than a lot of facilities. They're not open evenings. They're generally not open Saturday or Sunday. So that's one of the first places, if you need to visit, you want to get that out of the way. And again, there you need to know the structure of the courthouse, because courthouses outgrow their space, and so they may have both the courthouse and an archives like we have here in Fairfax County. There's the courthouse with the records, and then there's the court archives, which has a lot of the old records up to 1900 or even a little later, and so you need to know which facility to go to get those.
Where is the court archives?
The court archives used to be in the courthouse building, but now it's at the corner of Main Street and 123, or Chain Bridge Road. It's back in, I don't know whether it's the original courthouse, but it's one of the more original, if it's not the original courthouse buildings for Fairfax County. And it's a wonderful place to visit. They have a fantastic staff willing to help you in everything. You know, some of the other things that you want to be sure that you don't do there is observing the rules and regulations, but I have seen people do this. Don't correct your ancestors' records.
Oops.
I have actually been in courthouses, looked in the original books, and somebody has made a change or a correction in the record in pen. Yes. That's one that you may create your own records if you get caught doing that. So you want to make sure that you don't do something like that. You know, we have records that have mistakes in them. You know, earlier records are even more likely to have things. But yeah, it surprised me the very first time that boldly written in pen was a statement correcting something in the record, and I thought, boy, they were very, very lucky that, you know, today with cameras and everything else, they probably would have gotten
Well, you know,
caught.
it depends on what archive you're in or what courthouse you're in. I mean, I've been in a very small courthouse in Maine where they just sort of sent me to the back, and I could just go through everything on my own. Nobody was really monitoring it. All the way to, you know, having to request a document and waiting until somebody brings it to you, and then, you know, you're videotaped while you're watching it. So
so we have to be careful of those things. One of the other places that people, I think, don't always necessarily think about is visiting the churches where their ancestors attended church. And this is another one you really need to prepare for, because it may be a very large church. They may have a large staff, and it may be a very small church that's a one-person operation. You have the minister who does almost everything, or you might have the minister and a part-time secretary who's there a couple of days a week for a few hours. So making sure that you contact them ahead of time so they know you're coming. They may want to set up an appointment, make sure that you've done all that.
I've done a lot of that, and I have certainly gone in advance, set it up, had to sometimes plead, because they'll say, well, you know, I don't know whether I have it or not, and well, can I come in and see what you have? And I've, for those people who have gone to the trouble to let me see the original document, and that's what you want to see if it's possible. I've usually made a contribution afterwards,
Yes.
just to show how
Yes.
grateful I was, because not many people get to see those things.
Yes, yes. And, the thing too is knowing about the church records. What does the denomination keep as far as church records? I'm surprised when I talk about church records how many people don't realize that Baptist churches generally don't keep more formal records like the Methodist Church and
Oh,
the
really?
Catholic Church of like baptisms and things like that. They're often the records of the minister. He keeps and selects what he keeps records of and what he doesn't. And when the minister leaves, the records
Sometimes go with him, yeah.
And so that's one, Catholic Church, Baptist Church, other denominations, or Methodist Church keep more formal records, and so you.
So Chuck, what's
have
the
those.
value of, and I know the answer to this, but I think it's important to say this, the value of seeing the original rather than just looking at it online.
Well, one of the things I find is the thrill of touching the records, whether it's something about your ancestor or one that they've actually created. That's even more thrilling. When I go through pension files and I realize, okay, my ancestor touched, my second great grandfather in the 1870s filled out and signed this document applying for a pension. That
It's
just
thrilling.
is thrilling.
It's thrilling. When I was in
to
Poland,
me.
my ancestor signed his name, and then his wife didn't read or write, so she put X's. But I just actually touched it. I felt the indention, the difference in the indention of that one versus one other one that I had. I mean, they were there.
Yeah.
So that was exciting.
And other places that you, well, certainly a cemetery you can go and visit, but even sometimes funeral homes will allow you to come and look at their records.
Oh, really?
And share them with you. So again, these are facilities that you may need to make an appointment. If it's a large cemetery, they probably have more staff that if you walk in the door, they can help you. But if it's a small operation or a funeral home, you don't want to show up the day they have a funeral because they're not going to be able to help you. Or even a small cemetery, if they are dealing with burials and all, they may not have someone that can help you. But certainly going to the cemetery or the funeral home and being able to look at the records, going out, looking at the marker, and I tell people, look at signs that other people have been to the cemetery. Are there fresh flowers? Or there are other decorations on there? These may be family members that you don't necessarily know about. So I always say, be prepared. Take some Ziploc bags with you and some index cards or paper or something, and leave a note. I usually say, take a stick. The shish kebab sticks, the bamboo
skewer,
ones, the skewers, to me are great because you can stick that in the ground, you can tape the plastic bag to it and leave a note. And I've had a number of people come back and say to me, hey, I found a distant cousin I didn't know about because I left a note, because there were flowers on the grave. So they knew somebody was coming to the cemetery and doing things like that. So one of the other things, it's not necessarily a research facility, but in doing research, I tell people, look to see what newspapers are available. We all probably have the clippings that somebody in the family cut out of the paper. They never leave the paper
citation.
Information, with what paper and what date and the page. And I had a bunch of clippings from Atlantic County, New Jersey, and I knew that there were a number of papers. There was not a paper in Summers Point where my family lived. So I knew there were a number of papers in the area. So I went into the Historical Society in Atlantic County and I had the articles. I said, can you tell me if you have newspapers on microfilm, what newspaper these might be in, and newspapers on microfilm. The lady says, nope, don't have microfilm. And I kind of dejected, and she said, come with me. She took me upstairs. They had the newspapers in original form, all in books. They had them all like
in those really big books?
Great big book. And I'm literally
my
going
gosh.
through the pages and they're crumbling.
I
and
was
I'm
gonna
thinking,
say.
I hope that there is somewhere where these are on microfilm. I haven't really bothered to look, and then the coming back home is another important step. When you come back home, it's very easy to throw things on the desk, but you really want to, if you haven't entered the information and keep track of it, you want to put it in your program or on your sheets and everything. Write those thank you notes to people who were particularly helpful, and then file everything away so that you're ready for the next trip and do the evaluation, kind of the planning. Okay, I found all this, now where do I have holes? Or I found this, but I still don't have enough proof. Where else might I be able to find some more evidence? So.
And the closer you do that to coming back, the better off you are, because like in my Polish trip, there's so many foreign words and terms and things, and had I not recorded some of the stuff, the conversations as we were looking through books, I would have
Forgotten,
missed some of that.
Yeah, because
so that was important.
Because it is, you get back, life starts over again, and the memory starts to slip.
Yeah, pretty quickly.
of okay, what did I do, and how do you pronounce this word, and those kinds of things. So the more you do to organize things and get things cleaned up and put away, the better and more successful your trip's going to be.
And don't forget to cite your sources.
Yes.
In your notes, because otherwise you won't remember.
It's lost. So we're out of time.